And welcome back to the Baseball Development Hub podcast. My name is Trevor Powers, and I am joined as always on this podcast by co host Dan Galati. Dan, we're coming to our listeners here on a snowy North Carolina Sunday morning, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. But first off, how are you doing on this fine morning?
Good. Good morning. I can't believe we're sitting down here again. Feels like last week was 2 days ago. But that's a good thing. It means another week closer to baseball season. So, um, and with baseball season typically means warmer weather at some point, usually in this area. So I'm excited.
Yeah, excited for it to come quick here. And that kind of brings us to the topic of the episode today is just discussing, creating game-like atmospheres, getting game-ready reps, all of those kind of buzzy topics that a lot of coaches speak about, whether it's with limited resources, whether it's indoors, whether it's with limited manpower, and just kind of discussing our experiences plus the conversations that we've been lucky enough to have across a ton of college campuses to be able to create kind of the ideas that stem from and be able to have that conversation obviously for our listeners and kind of give them a little bit of our perspective and create a little dialogue around that. So it's always been tricky in this time of year for many college coaches, and I'm sure high school coaches feel the same of it's cold outside but we have games in a short amount of time, or practice doesn't start till a certain date and we only have 2.5 weeks to get those guys ready and prepared, and you're kind of just holding your breath and hoping that guys are preparing on their own time. When you talk about getting game ready reps on the pitching side of things, obviously part of that is for pitchers is what they do over the winter time and making sure they're prepared to handle the workload. But what are some of the core pieces of utilizing that when it comes start time at full team practice?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, just that I learned going through the process and then talking to some of these coaches is like always having a plan, no matter what the plan looks like. And as I've referenced on here a million times, if you've listened before, my former head coach used to a lesson that he taught me that I love. And not everyone likes it. I use this, I reference this lesson a lot in my like everyday life, and people are like, I don't get it, but for some reason it struck with me. But it's like the best part about having a plan is if you have a plan, then you can adjust, because things get thrown in your way, whether it's weather or whatever. Especially in baseball, like if you have to then you know move your practice or change how it's going, if you have a plan set, then it's easier to adjust from that plan and move forward, and it doesn't send you into complete chaos. Because if you're just flying by the seat of your pants, and then something happens, which it inevitably will, it's really hard to then adjust. So for me, it's like have a plan of some kind, and it's so important. You know, for pitchers, yes, you would like as many game like reps as possible. It would be great if you had 25 innings under everyone's belt by the time you opened up, which is not possible. For me, it's building them up to be able to handle workload, to pitch the necessary innings early in the year, and continue to build as you move through the season. So, however, you go about building that workload up, then kind of within that structure is when you can start to kind of make it game like. And on the pitching side, you can't always have a hitter in the box. You can't always be seeing what pitches are doing against the barrel. It's just, you have limited time, you have limited resources. The hitters need to be doing other things. You can't just constantly have your arms, be throwing against hitters and beginning those live reads. You have to kind of get a little bit creative. You have to, I think, it's a mindset with your guys, telling them to understand, or having them understand like what's the goal of what we're doing today, whether it's a throwing session even or a bullpen, but especially the bullpen days. Like, what are we working on here? And Jimmy Jackson always talks about, like, over the rubber, over the plate. What are their guys bullpens, what are they working on that day? Are they working mechanically, or are they working on pitch shape? And a lot of times when you get to this point in the season, when you're talking about getting ready to play games, it's a lot of over the plate stuff, right? It's like, you know, are we commanding certain pitches? Where are we commanding it? And then, that's why I think, things like charting become huge, and then competitions within those bullpens. And there's several different ways to compete within those bullpens. I'll never forget one of my, you know, Arizona does a really good job with this. John DeRoyan, just their competitions, being able to bring energy and juice to their bullpen sessions, and different games that you can do within that is really important. But for me, it like starts with, you have to start with a plan. What do you want your guys to look like? How are you going to build them up? A schedule so that you can adjust. And then it's about who do you need to, build up and extend the most, kind of have an idea of guys' roles, and then competing within kind of that structure is the easiest way to do it. But that's interesting because like all of these things are kind of, there's a million different ways to get to that scenario that you can take. It's just really kind of your preference and what you're comfortable with.
My question for you, as we go on the pitching side, and we'll spin this conversation around, and I'll do the hitting side a little bit later, and let you ask some of the questions. But my question for you is, how do you almost build up that mindset of those guys to turn on the compete element of even in those practice settings, of getting them to understand that this is like supposed to be competitive, or turning off the mechanical side of the brain and turning on the execution side of the plane of the brain, like the over the plate that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier said than done, obviously. And sometimes, and maybe this was just showed like a lack of my ability as a pitching coach, but there were times where I wish I could just like flick on a hack attack and dial that sucker up, because like that's game like on the hitting side, right? And it's like you don't have that on the pitching side. So how do you adjust that mindset? You're not going to be. I wasn't successful with all 20 plus pitchers, obviously, and it was a constant battle. But I think it's just like reinforcement. Constantly, reinforcing that point, verbally. I'm someone who I love having conversations. I love communicating. That's why I sit here and do this all the time. So I like to always kind of just constantly telling them that's what it was, teaching them that structure, and then you know setting them up to fail almost in bullpen sessions, for me, because sometimes it's not always like there was great learning lessons in those times, especially if you had guys who did want to always tinker with mechanics. If you set up a bullpen session that had parameters or goals within it, we're trying to hit, I don't even know if I ever did this, but like let's say we're trying to hit 7 glove side fastballs for strikes. Just a completely random thing I pulled. If they're worried about their mechanics and they're failing at that, and they start off 0 for 4, take them off the mound, like things like that. And then yeah, like obviously there's going to be some frustration built in there, and if I could, depending on the structure of how quickly I had to move through bullpens, you bring them back and let them finish. But like things like that, where sometimes there is like, okay, this is a learning lesson for you. Like I was completely, I was on you that entire bullpen because you weren't accomplishing what we needed you to accomplish. This is your equivalent of failing on the mound. And every guy is different. So you have to know how your guys react. Some guys you could really do that with, and some guys you couldn't, right? Because they're completely hard on themselves from pitch one. And it's like, I'm not even going to say anything to you. You didn't succeed today. You understand that. I don't need to tell you that. But kind of for me, if I could set parameters and have a challenge, and like, here's our goal for today, and, let them fail. Try not to step in when they are having a bad session, or try not to, because that's going to happen and we need you, right? Like, everyone looks good in preseason in their bullpens when there's no hitter, right? Because like stuff looks good, velocity can be there. A lot of times they're fresh. They'll be around the zone for the most part. You're at least usable guys. Even then, when you move into any live scenarios, like there's no fielders, there's no nothing. You look good. You look good enough, right? As long as you're around the zone. You really figure out what your guys are going to be able to do and how good they are when a guy boots a ball when the season starts and there's traffic on base and you walk a guy and you got to hold a runner now. So I think trying to set up scenarios, and we talked to, I probably didn't do the best job at this, but, talking to some of the coaches that we have of that do this, of putting them in positions where they can fail, and letting them fail, and, trying to get them to work through that, is just extremely important. And that's the best way to go about it. And from the pitching standpoint, like you're never going to get fully there, right? You're never going to really simulate game like reps until you're out there. Especially because like, even if you are doing some sort of live AB situation, unfortunately you have to be inside, there's no defense back there. You don't know what the outcome is until it's game day. And you need guys to be able to be fearless in the strike zone, and be able to, pitch within the zone, compete. And when things start to go haywire, you need to kind of have guys that are able to work through those innings and limit damage best they can. So kind of setting up things in their bullpen, and and making sure that there are ways that, you can have them struggle really hard, parameters. I don't know, throw three sliders and put it into this small box, even your best guys. Like, okay, you didn't do it. You went 1 for 3. That's 33%. That's not good enough. How do you adjust? How do you fix it? Get back in there, do it again. That was even one of the most simple ones is when they would throw a bad pitch, throw it again. Because a lot of times guys want to move off of that when they can't get it 2, 3 times in a row. Keep making them throw it until they hit it.
So here's my next question: is how important then is communication to your guys so that they know? Because I feel like I've seen this a lot, especially on the pitching side. Because not that pitchers are delicate, I think hitters are just as delicate. But there is the side of like, coach hates me, right? Like, and I'm not getting the opportunities, especially for guy 15 on the staff, or maybe for some smaller staffs, guy 8 in the high school staff, where you only use 4 to 5 guys, and you're trying to create that accountability structure and put them in a position where they are failing, and you're trying not to be the bad guy per se, and obviously you don't want to kick them while they're down, but also be making sure that you're also holding them to the standard that's expected for your staff.
Yeah, it's everything. Obviously, like just like in every walk of life, communication is so important because everybody thinks differently or receives things differently. So, like, I think that you have to set a standard as early as you can. So obviously when you're at the college level, luckily, like for me, the fall was all about setting the standard. That's all I cared about. So that when we got into the spring, we could then ask them to participate at that standard, right? Because the first week of the fall, like I'm not asking people to be at the standard right away, first day, but I am giving you an example of it. And then it's about how you yourself. I always tried to, and I don't even know if my guys noticed this or paid attention to it, but everything I did, even if it was the smallest thing and what might seem like the dumbest thing within our program, I tried to do it to the standard that I wanted our guys to compete at. Right. Like, and that's everything because it's like, well, I'm holding myself to the standard. And I would be honest with them. If I didn't do something well enough, explain something, to bring up a practice plan well enough, whatever, I would hold myself accountable and let them know that I messed it up. And just being honest in that sense, my hope was that then when I was holding them to that standard and holding them accountable, they would say, well, this is fair. When he's wrong, he says he's wrong. So when I'm not performing to that standard, then he's going to tell me. And, it's a challenge. And obviously, if you can get in live situations, where you have a hitter in the box, it then becomes a lot easier to do all of this. That's obviously the best way to get guys game ready. Is just because then there is a barrel, there is a count. But even in bullpen sessions, you can have a count and you can go through an inning. And I think that's like the most basic thing that probably everybody does. But like how you approach that day and how you approach a drill like that in a bullpen of like, okay, we're gonna put the dummy in the box and we're gonna throw an inning here in this bullpen. Um, how you communicate through that with them, how you set that up, how serious they take that, like that's all so important. And then all of this is to say, like, there's only so much you can do as a coach, right? They have to be able to take it seriously. And typically, what you'll see is your better guys compete in every single setting. So if you
Mhm.
tell them that you're competing in this, if you tell them, hey, we're putting a dummy in the box, he's not going to swing, you got to, throw 3 strikes before you throw 4 balls, or whatever it is, or execute the way we want you to, they're going to compete and they're going to, compete really hard. The guys who don't take it as seriously, they're probably not your better guys. The guys who are like, it doesn't actually matter. It might be good, but they're not going to be your best guys. So just, and look, the reality is also that like they play the sport because they like competing anyway. So it can be simpler, right? Like if you just give them some sort of competition at all, um, they're gonna compete. And we would do it even in throwing drills at times. We would set up a 9 hole and do different throwing drills just on our non days when we're on the slope, just to get them competing and feeling what it's like competing with each other's. We would do that a lot where we would put point values to different you know things on the 9 hole and we would do throwing drills with it and we were keeping score with everybody and they would be competing with each other. And again, there would be guys who would compete really hard, talk a little crap to their teammates, things like that. Those were usually our best guys. The guys who weren't were the guys who would go through the motions during drills like that.
High school coaches, if you're sitting here going, I need a 9 hole, I need a dummy. Our friends over at BP zones, they'll hook you up. They'll take care of you with the strike zone. And, especially for manpower concerns, if you don't have a catcher or any of those and you want these guys to get their work in, you want them throwing short boxes while your catchers get some swings in. Our friends over at BP zones, they're gonna hook you up with a dummy as well. They've got some really good durable stuff that your pitchers can throw and hit and beat up and do everything to. And they'll stay good in place. So here's my question for you, Dan, next, that I think is an issue for smaller school colleges as well as high school coaches that I find really interesting. These players and athletes, they spend so much time over the winter training in maybe a private setting where it's all about the TrackMan reading. It's all about the radar gun. It's not about, being able to command a breaking ball in an 0-2 count to get that swing and miss and do all the things that we're expecting them to execute on and compete, right? Maybe there's a competition, but usually the competition in a private setting is, and not to kick
How
private
hard can you
settings
throw?
while we're done.
Yeah.
Yeah, how hard can you throw? Can we do a pull down at 100? How hard can we throw this 3-ounce baseball? How do you balance that conversation? Because I think it's so much more difficult in the pitching world because in today's day and age, data and information is so accessible. Every private facility has a portable TrackMan, all of those resources that they have, that these guys come back consumed by vert, or if they have enough seam shifted wake, or if they're doing this. And you're just like, dude, your stuff's good enough, and we need you to be able to execute to be able to actually get outs when it matters most. Muted.
Good. Got beat by the mute button this morning. I think for me, like when you get back to January and it's go time for the season, that stuff has to go out the window. And like all the stuff you did in the facility is fantastic, but it comes a point where hey, it's now compete time against hitters, and no matter what your vert is, your spin rate is, um, it doesn't matter as long if you can't compete, if you can't throw enough strikes, if you can't get guys out, then we don't really care what your stuff looks like at that point. And so I think it's kind of setting up your season so that they understand that and they can understand that you know we're in the time when all that matters is getting outs. It doesn't always matter how it looks. Now, depending on what resources you have, you can balance it and do a little bit of that and say, and on a day to day basis, say, well, okay, you didn't perform as well. We can look at the numbers and why. But if you don't have those resources, then it kind of does become about, you know, did you get guys out? Were you successful? And I don't like saying that flat out bottom line because it's not always result oriented, right? But it is when it comes to competing in the strike zone, right? So it might not be result oriented in the sense that like, okay, this guy, he gave up, a couple hits and a double, or like, then he hit that 3-run home, give up then a 3-run homer. And like, if we're only focused on the results, that's a bad day. But if we're process oriented, maybe he was pitching ahead and he just missed his spot a couple times. And that's a good learning lesson, right? But it's more so about like, hey, were you competing in the zone? Because if you're, as much as I hated it, the Washington Nationals thing of like, no one cares how hard you throw ball four, like there is a little bit of truth to that, right? Like you have to be able to compete in the zone. And yes, the stuff does matter, but that's what you were just working on all winter in the off season. That's probably what you were working on in the fall. Like that's the time to do that. When it gets to January, we have to get outs, right? We have to get 27 outs to win a game, or 21 outs if you're playing 7-inning games, right? Like you have to get those outs to win a game. How are we going to be able to do that? Who's going to be able to help us do that? And that's what really has to be the focus. And, you can't be completely results oriented, like I said, where it's like, oh, they gave up runs, bad outing. They gave up hits, bad outing. No, but like usually, what's the process? Okay, for us, we were a team that like we were going to spin a lot. I needed you to be able to spin for strikes. Okay, well, why did we give up the 3-run homer? Well, we couldn't locate our off speed. We fell behind in the count. We had to give in with a fastball. We hit the homer. So it's like the process was bad. We didn't throw the first two pitches for the strike. It's not it's not always about the result pitch, the pitch that the home run was hit on, the pitch that the hit was give up on. It's usually what happens before then leading up to it, And I think being able to just kind of, again, you have to communicate that and they have to understand that. And some guys struggle with that because they do get all consumed and they want to know their numbers. And sometimes you just have to take it away from them and say, that's not what's important today. And this is what's important. And then you have to reward based off of that as well, right? You have to reward guys who understand that, pick that up, and follow that plan.
Yeah, and I think to kind of hammer home on the point of what the Nationals did, and I know it caught a lot of heat in a lot of the corners of the baseball world, but the reality is I think every college pitching coach would agree with that sentiment, right? Like at the end of the day, we've never interviewed a pitching coach that has been like, yeah, we prefer for our guys to throw ball four at 110 miles per hour because the process of 110-mile-per-hour fastball is better than a strike. They're like, no, we need our guys to throw strikes. Each of the staffs that we've been lucky enough to spend time around have guys that have good enough stuff that if it was in the strike zone, they'd be first team All Americans, but they can't sniff the mound because it's not over the plate. So I think that is a very important piece of the puzzle that the coaches that are actually spending time with these athletes in season really have to bear down on and focus on is like, hey man, your stuff can be as wicked as humanly possible, but when it comes time to getting 27 outs, we can't be giving up free passes on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And not to get like too off on a tangent about that one thing, probably interesting example. I think what bothered me the most, like about bothers me, is like you shouldn't have to hang that sign up. Now for younger players, like in high school, even some younger players in college or even college players, that sentiment, they probably need to hear that sometimes. Um, but like it's one of those things where it's like both are important, throwing strikes and having
Mm-hmm.
good stuff. Cause like it's also like, yeah, no one cares how hard, like no one cares if you throw strike two if it's 76, right? Like I could say the same thing. Um, but yeah, exactly. Like you have to, the understanding is like you have to be able to compete in the zone. And the thing with pitching too is like it's all about conviction, which is why so much of what I'm saying is like having them, communicating with them and rewarding the things that matter the most, right? Because if guys go out there and they don't have conviction and it doesn't matter kind of what's going on that day. And we've all seen it. If you've been around the game enough, if you've coached long enough, or if you've played long enough, you've had a teammate or you've had a player who like you could tell from pitch one that they were going to have a bad day because you could just tell that there was no confidence there. They were, running away from barrels. And it's like every single like the common theme of every single pitching coach that we get the chance to talk to, is competing in the zone, fearlessly competing in the zone, be relentless in the zone, continue to throw strikes. Gave up a homer, right back in with strike one, right? Like, and those were the times that, like, in those situations, if you can get into situations, especially like again, like the best way to do this is if you can get in a live one-on-one pitcher versus hitter situation, and the guy gives up a barrel. Like the guys who always excite me the most is like the guys who like were then the very next batter after they just gave up a smoked ball were 0-2 on the next guy. And it's like, that's great. I don't even care what happens the rest of this at bat. You gave up, right? Like someone got you. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. If you pitch enough this season as a pitcher, you're going to get got. You can't avoid it. What's most exciting is the guys who then can just like, it doesn't matter to them. They can stay kind of level and they can understand that they just have to get right back in the zone and continue to compete. And again, reinforcing that, charting.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I think I mentioned this earlier, but like chart I think everybody does at this point, but like charting bullpens and having conversations, giving them, giving guys that chart, letting them see it. The last one I kind of have here, I was a big proponent and we would journal. I would have a form for my pitchers for after every outing, in game, inter squad, bullpen, any live situation, and it would just be a questionnaire that I'd want them to fill out. This went well. This didn't go well. This felt good. Why? What was my routine like? Put a score on it, and then talk to them about that. Just because sometimes, especially in live scenarios, things can speed up on guys, and they can almost black out, for lack of a better term, or not remember, or it gets going so quick that they kind of lose control of what they're doing. And one of the most important things I think in being a pitcher is like being able to be present, be centered, and kind of flush the last pitch and no matter the result and get right back on the mound, which is massive. So being able to communicate with them and talk through how they felt and how they think things went, because that's the other thing is sometimes you'll see things completely different from the dugout than what they were seeing and feeling on the mound, and being able to have a conversation with that and prepare them for that. And this will be the last thing. Sorry. I think the most important thing is like setting expectations for what you expect from guys for the season so that they can then prepare that way, I always thought was really important. Now, I'm not saying like you tell guys on the first day, like, hey, you're going to pitch game one, and that's my expectation for you. But it's like, this is what I see you as. Um, this is how I think you can accomplish that. This is what we need to work towards and how we need to get there so that they can have those expectations set. I think setting those like kind of goals and like being that guiding person for them was massive. And then how you go about doing that is kind of up to you again. And what are your strengths and how do you best do it? And what kind of time frame do you have to get that done? And what kind of resources do you have to get that done is different for everybody. But at least letting them know, setting expectations and how they respond when you set expectations is so much better than just like, the keeping them in the dark and it's an open competition for every spot. I wasn't a fan of that. Guys know that's BS. They're not stupid. They'll see right through that.
That's a good one, and those are tough conversations to have, right? Like I think that's why people avoid them more times than not is that they don't want guys to check out because they go about that conversation wrong. Here is one question off of kind of what you said, the journaling part. Obviously, I think that'd be really awesome for everybody to do, and it's one of those things that maybe not every coach in the country has time if they're not able to sit down after a player's pen. But I think at least giving those guys something where they can reflect, I think, is very beneficial and be able to look back on what went well. One of the things that I've noticed about journaling that helped with a lot of hitters is being able to go back to cues that work that they forgot. Like you'd be surprised. Like you think, and I put myself in a player's shoes when this happened, is like when I was a player, I'd have something click in around a BP. And I'd be like, I'm never going to forget that. And then Thursday, I'd be struggling in that same round of BP. I'd be like, what was that thing that actually worked? And it's like, but when you actually write it down, you remember so much easier because you go back and you're like, man, Tuesday, January 27th, I was raking. What were my notes that day? And you go back and they can be consistent in their mindset and their approach. And pitching's the same thing. The one thing that I would also add on the charting side of thing, and this is both sides of the ball, is let your other pitchers chart, right? If you're one man, you don't have a director of pitching development, you don't have an assistant pitching coach, you don't have a director of ops that just sits there and is handling the technology. You're one coach and you're one man that's doing all of it, wearing so many different hats when you've got three bullpens going at once because obviously you don't have the ability. Let your other pitchers chart because that allows them to learn the why behind so many, be able to evaluate what those guys are doing and be able to look at, okay, that's why, what was that, what went wrong. And especially for younger guys, it helps them learn so much. And charting in game and live settings is the same thing, right? Like it makes them pay attention and learn the game. So I don't know if you have a perspective on that as well, but I think it's really important for a coach who's like, I wear so many different hats, we can't chart. Let your guys that are just sitting around waiting, let them chart. Next guy up, chart.
Yeah, nothing I hated more than wasted time in practice. And sometimes pitchers, a lot of pitchers, that's what they think baseball practice is. And nothing would make me more angry. Like, there's always something you can be doing to getting better, helping your teammates get better. And so, absolutely, like always, yes, you don't have enough hands. You never have enough hands. There's always something you could be doing as a coach. And so, a lot of times, like charting was not, that falls lower on the list. It's important for them. They need it. And it's important for the program. But like, you're needed elsewhere. And guys are more than capable of charting. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, 100% without question. And yeah, the journal thing, like you said, yeah, like that's one of the biggest things is like when they do hit a rough patch, it's another resource to go back and like go look at when you had a good bullpen or go look at when you had a good live session. Cause yeah, again, like we would do it all year and guys would be journaling in game after they would come out of games for us. When their outing was over, I wasn't discussing that with them in game. Obviously, my attention's focused on the field, but maybe if there was something we needed to talk about from that outing the next day at practice or before the game the next day, we could always go back to that resource so that they could remember and you could have that conversation 24 hours later with them. And be like, okay, what went wrong yesterday? What we think? It's like, well, like go back to what you wrote and let's see it. And maybe it doesn't always have to be as soon as their outing's done in game because some guys need a minute or two to decompress and recenter themselves if they're upset or whatever. That was always the funny thing too, is like you would have two different guys. You'd have the guys who would love to journal right away when they would had a good outing because they were fired up, and then you'd have the guys who would love to journal right away when they were angry, so they could just rip themselves. And so you need to be like kind of somewhere in the middle there. But yeah, it's a great like huge resource to go back to. When hey, I didn't do a good job today, or I have it's two bullpens in a row where I haven't felt good, but I feel like I threw the ball really good 10 days ago. We'll go back and look why and figure out why. Um, because this time of year it can be a blur. Like it can go so quick, and it can speed up on
So
coaches too. Like
fast.
I remember there were times where it would speed up on me, where it's like, oh, we open up in 2 weeks. How did this happen?
Well, that's the importance of planning it out too, which I guess on the hitting side is something that we can discuss. I also want to plug from the journal standpoint. That's something that you got from Maryland's pitching coach Jimmy
Yes,
Jackson, right? Yes.
yes, yeah.
Which for any coaches that are listening to this right now, Jimmy Jackson's awesome. We interviewed him on our main channel. Really smart dude and has a ton of great stuff that I know Dan relied on a lot when he was a pitching coach. And his journal that he has is actually on our Instagram page as well as his Instagram page and his Twitter page as well. If you want to, if you're like, hey man, that's something that I'm interested in, he's got it set up where you can purchase it. And obviously you can purchase 20 copies, hand them out to your guys, whatever it is, head over to either of our social channels and purchase one. I know Jimmy's one of the best in the business. So being able to give him some credit for that as well is super important. So Dan, obviously 30 minutes on the pitching side, awesome because, I think pitching's so much more complex and difficult, right? Right. You said for a hitting side, it's turn on the hack attack or throw a firm fastball, right? Spin them to death, whatever it is to be able to get that. You have so many pitchers that go live on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So your guys have three. It's not like you have limited bullets in the box to be able to use. So being able to create game like and competition based environments is a lot easier on the offensive side. But I also think it's a lot more difficult to execute upon, right? Like I think that when it comes game time, obviously success 30% of the time is a huge successful season. So I think that's one of the balances is being able to create those challenging environments without being overly complex in what you're doing and tearing your guys down in the process. I think that's the big thing a lot of hitting coaches talk about now is sure we want to ride our guys hard because hitting in the SEC is hard or hitting in our conference is hard as we've talked to a lot of high level coaches, but there's also the side of things that's like, yeah, but we also need them to be puffing their chest out walking into the box with their walk up song on, ready to roll and ready to fight, right? And so it's a really big balance that comes from the early season part is getting guys to buy in and understand why things are competitive, but also being able to not tear them down to the point that they don't even want to compete. They're like, coach, now I think I'm going to be PO now because I don't want to hit anymore, right? So I think that that's a huge piece of the puzzle for any hitting coach is making sure that they understand in that early time frame that we need to get our guys ready. But I think it's a matter of not tearing them down to the extent that there's no confidence built into the offense.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing to me is like because I was obviously kidding, like because it's not just crank up the hack attack, but it's also because like that's great, like, and it's great if guys can hit high velo, but if that's all you're training for, then I doubt they're going to be as prepared as you need them to be. I think what the best hitting coaches do, and I still am always curious this every time we talk to hitting guys is like, how do you tie in those settings? Because it's great to go in there and say, hey, we're going to compete today, just like it is on the pitching side. But to me, hitting, so much of hitting is like knowing your approach, having an approach, being convicted in that approach, and then being able to compete against 90-mile-an-hour fastballs, really good breaking stuff. How do you go about kind of tying the approach piece into that? Because again, like if you're in a cage and you're like, hey, we're just going to hit the hack attack, and we're going to crank it up and we're going to throw high rod fastballs all day at you. And like, yeah, guys will eventually time it up and figure it out. And that's great, but they're not working on their approach at all in that. So how do you go about like kind of rewarding, teaching approach, mixing that in and rewarding guys who stick to that approach?
Yeah, I think obviously, I mean, like you said, kind of on your end, communication is key, right? Communicating expectations. I always called everything. Nothing we ever did was. I always said we have to train with an active mind. Nothing is mindless on the offensive side. So even if that's something where it's like dead arm BP or mini hack dialed in right down the middle, it's like I want our guys to be like, hey, less than two, nobody on, gab to gab, right? Try to hit a homer here, right? Because that's even training with an active mind and having an approach. And because nothing in game is inactive in your mind, there's always a situation. There's always something the pitcher's doing that we have to be prepared for. There's always something that we have to turn our brain on. And I always used to think when I was a player that so many rounds of BP when it was just dead arm straight over the middle and do it, even when it was like, hey, Oppo, right? Or hey, hit and run. It was like mindless. It was so monotonous in the nature of it. So we would always just adapt our rounds for even straight fastball rounds would be an approach based, and the expectation obviously is to execute at a high rate. If it is something like where it's like dead fastball right down the middle, it's like, hey, we want to hit this hard 7 out of 10 times, right? Like, and having that external outcome that guys are able to hang their hat on and turn that brain on. But it's by creating different, right, not making it monotonous, be having different things for different guys, right? Like, your big burly first baseman shouldn't be doing really hit and runs or bump for hits or anything like that. So we would always create everything with some form of active mind within the structure of it, and being able to communicate that to the guys, I think, was really important. Then obviously scenario based stuff, I think, is the easiest way to say, like, hey, there's an expectation, this is the situation that you're in right now, your job is to do this, right? And then being able to chart it, right? And I think there's a really cool idea that we used at Arcadia that was really a foundational piece to what we did. We called it execution BP, but basically we set it up where we would show up every Thursday and we would split the guys into two teams. We had 3 different hitting groups. And again, I understand resources are limited in some spaces. We had a bubble, so we weren't doing this in a cage. We could track a lot more. We had a hitting Rapsodo, so we could know if it was, hit hard enough or if it was deceiving to the eye. It wasn't catching a net or an L screen within the 5 feet of off the barrel. But being able to set guys up where it was like, hey, round one was let's just say 2 strike hitting, right? And the expectation, what I always said, my 2 strike approach was hard in play, right? That was it. Like, obviously we're not expecting to get a hit. All those things is you're expecting to put pressure on the defense was always our goal. So we would track if it was hit hard or not, and basically reward or take a negative. And we split them up into teams, and we would keep track, and we would also keep track of the individual success rate, and obviously utilize that on a week to week basis as a rankings. And then round two was runner on third, infield back. So big part focus on the ground counts, gets the run in. It's less than 2 outs, obviously. So contact is most important, but something in the air specifically to the big part is what we're looking for as well. Just driving that run home. Round three was infield in, runner on third, less than 2 outs. So specifically hard in the air, get it over the infield, focus on that. And then the last round was what we called backbreakers, which was runner on second or scoring position, basically with 2 outs, right? We felt like those were situations that if we executed at a high level, that we'd win a lot of baseball games, because obviously you get to 2 outs with a runner on scoring position. The other team, as you know, as a pitching guy, is going to be really fired up if they get out of that situation. So we called them backbreakers because they were obviously mood killers on the other side. So only hits count at that point. And we would just track it, chart it. All I did those days was sit and chart. And I just circle or X if a guy executed based on what our expectations was. And what we did to create different environments with that is week one was all fastballs. So our best players, we're close to 90% success rate. Week two, we do 2 and 2. So they're seeing different speeds. So they have to show at least some form of adjustability, but they know what's coming, right? So they can't just get geared up for a heater for 4 swings. They have to get their timing a lot quicker. And then week three was random, slightly below game speed. So getting to see random pitches, but at a speed that's kind of reasonable to expect them to execute. And then by the time we got to week four, which was last week of the preseason, typically in our environment, was at game speed and expecting them to execute. Like I said, we kept percentages for every guy, and we would just post our rankings each week. And the All-American that we had that ended up playing Division One, he was at the top of our execution rate. And it was something that our guys always understood where they stood in our eyes, because the things we tracked: swing decisions, we tracked execution rate, we tracked hard hit rate in games, quabs, all of those things. Our starting nine were always somewhere in that top 9 of everything we charted. There was nothing that was out of the ordinary, and the guys that didn't play typically didn't execute at a high enough rate. So that was something that, based on the resources we had, and you can do this with an arm, you can do fastballs and curveballs, you can create challenging environments from there, and just being able to chart and track and turn on that side of the brain that's like, hey, there's a runner on second, 2 outs, I got to get a hit, right? Instead of just being in there focused on like, well, my arms need to be here, I need to stay inside the baseball, I need to let it get deep, all those things that can come up in just like a mindless round of BP where you're working on your swing. We need to turn that side of the brain off and turn on, like, this is the competition side.
I love posting it, and so like those guys never don't know where they're at from a successful point. Kind of similarly though to what we talked about on the pitching side, a lot of times those guys go home and like they're so mechanical when they come back. I feel like offensively, and you talked about how week one you're kind of throwing them into competition based stuff right away. Is there ever any pushback on like what do you do when there is pushback? Because I know there's pushback on guys who are so stuck in the mechanical side of things when it comes time. Because like you said, look, it doesn't matter what your swing looks like. If we have a runner on less than third or runner on third with less than 2 outs, we need to get that run home, especially early in the season, right? When pitchers are always a little ahead of the offense. Like those are huge runs. Those win and lose you games, and you know, one of my favorite things ever was Coach Gambino saying there's no such thing as small things because they seem little until they cost you a game. Um, how do you go about breaking them from the, hey, this is like the mechanical time is over. This is, like you said, I love the active mind thing. Um, the approach is something that we're tweaking with, but now it's time to execute.
I think it starts with you, right? Like every hitting coach that I've been around that guys get too mechanical, I think they're too mechanical, right? Like I do think that there is a large level of that, at least in the college game, where there are really good coaches who just spend way too much time on the mechanics of the swing. And I think being able to communicate to your guys that like that's not something I'm going to hold you accountable for in season unless we feel like it's a necessity, right? And that's the beauty of Division 3 baseball and high school baseball, probably even to a larger extent, is we have so many short windows of time where we're able to coach. I think Division 3 is now 5 weeks. Obviously, high school, what do you even get in the fall? I know when we were in high school, we didn't get anything in the fall that was legally in high school baseball in the state of Delaware. Is you don't have the time to work on mechanics. I think when you're able to sit back and reflect and be like, hey, every time you make a mechanical adjustment, there's a regression before progress, and that's not even guaranteed progress. And that scenario is being able to communicate that to guys, be like, we don't have time for that. Right. So I think it does start at the top of with the hitting coach, that what they're focused on and what they're communicating on, because we didn't have a big issue with, we had a couple guys that we tinkered with some stuff, and we had some couple of guys that I didn't tinker enough with. And I still look back and say, man, if I'd made that adjustment, we had one kid specifically who, bigger dude, not very fast, hit a ton of ground balls. And I remember I went to him in March of his senior year, and I was like, man, like if we could get your line drive rate up, or your fly ball rate, like you hit the ball hard enough, you're kind of our best power guy. We think you'd tap into some more power. And again, this is March of his senior year, right? Like kind of late to have this conversation, don't you think? And I remember him going, well, when I first got here, like I was hitting too many fly balls, and just to kind of fit in the system of what we were trying to do, I started hitting more ground balls, and I was kind of almost rewarded for it. And I saw a lot of, seeing eyed singles and things like that. And it kind of just was something I kept doing. And, so we made the adjustment, and I kid you not, when I say he hit 5 balls in our regional that were 100 at 40 degrees, because we had finally gotten him to hit balls in the air, but it was too high at that point. That would have been home runs if he hit him at 25. No joke. And that's how he ended his career. And I'm like, man, if I would have said something in November and we would have made that adjustment a lot sooner and spent the whole winter working on that, he probably would have been a 15 home run guy for us. Right. Like, so I think that those are the horror stories, are the ones you forget. But there's also the side of things that, like, guys, being able to get guys to understand that, like, what you expect out of them is like, hey man, we got to compete. Your swing is your swing. My other side of the coin is I had seniors come up to me in May and be like, hey, I think I want to change this. And I was like, dude, you graduate in a week. Your baseball career is over. Your swing is what your swing is. And being able to understand that, like, because we are all passionate about the mechanics of the swing or on the pitching side, but being able to be like, hey, that might not be valuable right now at this point in time, to be able to do that. And so I always try to have a balance of that perspective of making sure we knew where we were on the calendar, making sure the guys knew where we were on the calendar and when it's important to make those swing adjustments, versus the guys that obviously are playing every day and having to compete. And I think that's the other thing. Where's the guy on the roster? Right? Guy 15, maybe you pull him aside and spend a little time after practice. Or we had a guy who swung and missed through a ton of stuff, right, early in the year. And he didn't play. He stopped playing. Really good athlete, really good hitter. Ended up being an all region guy the 2 years after I'd left. And he was just whiffing through everything. Well, he basically got a month of development time where we would spend early time and post practice in the cage working on his mechanics. Well, he finished the season on a heater, turned into an all region guy the next year, played 2 more years, right? Like, so we were lucky enough that like one of our most talented players didn't have to play every day because we were deep and good. But like those are, it's just a balance, right? Like, and I know that's kind of cliche coach speak, but it really is being able to put yourself in their shoes and understand what their expectations are every time they step on the field.
Yeah, it's another example of why the communication piece is so important, right? Like it's like letting them know where they stand, what the expectation is, and like then it's your, then it's your job to help them get there, right? Like it's completely different if you don't communicate that well and you tell them, well, you're not good enough right now because we need you to be, we need you to, be 3 out of 4 quabs every time you're out there, and that's what all these guys do, and you don't do it, and then that's the conversation. Well, it's like, yeah, okay, you can if you communicate with them before and they know that's the expectation, and you're posting the quabs so they know that they're not hitting it, and then you tell them we're not there. This is how we get there. We can do that, right? Like I'm here for you to get you to that point so we can get you into the lineup or whatever the adjustment needs to be. Because a lot, again, like I said this with the pitchers guys, like guys care. They want to compete. They like to compete. They'll be harder on themselves a lot of times than you have to be for the most part. Um, how do you go about, because offensively, like hitting is brutal, right? Like you can do everything right and get zero reward for it. What's the balance then of like when you are dialing up the hack and you are firing nasty sliders at them? You talked about not beating them down too much. What do you do when the guys, because guys will just absolutely, we've all seen it. We've all been around hitters who like it's this time of the year they've struggled in the cages off a hack attack, and you can just tell that there's nothing. Their eyes are glazed over, right? Like there's nothing going on back there. Lights are on, no one's home because they're so frustrated and beat down. How do you then go about building it up, the confidence back up while still preparing them to be ready to compete, early in the season?
So it was twofold for me, right? Like one of the things that I said in my first hitters meeting, one of the things I said when I interviewed, because I had a players session with the interview, was like, you guys are gonna feel like crap sometimes with me. Like I am a core believer in challenging environments. Hitting is hard, so we're gonna create harder environments than the game, so that when you're facing 86 with an okay breaker, you're gonna be on time for that consistently and getting them to understand that early. So I kind of set that tone like day one. Was like, you guys are going to fail. It's going to suck. And there were definitely days, especially early in the fall, where it was ugly. Like if you just rolled up to the park, you'd be like, this is bad news Bears, right? Like this team is not very good. They're not making a ton of contact, especially for some young guys. And again, that's where we had to adjust as coaches of being like, okay, maybe the big hack fastball is too much, right? Like at this point in time, and being able to adjust. And then come springtime, it was about incrementally increasing difficulty, right? Like you can't expect guys who just did flippies and tee work all winter to show up in the spring and week one be able to get their foot down for 2 pitches that are both plus grades in your conference. You can't, right? Like you're not putting them in a position to succeed. So what we would do is break it up where it's like in one cage we're doing hack attack fastballs, in one cage we're doing hack attack breaking balls. That's week one. In week two, we bring the hack attack both into the same cage. We go, double barrel, and we do 2 fastballs and 2 breaking balls. And then we go into random, and then we go into random at game speed, right? And gradually building those guys up. And what we had seen which we did much better job in the spring than in the fall, was those guys were more prepared faster when we got to week 4, because it was never drinking out of the fire hydrant for them, right? Like we never exposed them to something that they weren't currently ready for. Now, did some guys on the bottom of the roster struggle more than your top guys? Of course, right? But those guys typically struggled with whatever it was that we were doing at that point in time, if we're creating these difficult environments, trying to create them as game like as possible, because ultimately we are trying to prepare to compete at a regional level. So your bottom of the roster guys just might not be ready to compete at that. And that's where those guys need a little bit of TLC sometimes to make sure that their confidence isn't shot, because you never know when their opportunity might come. But then I think the other balance was we would also do feel good stuff to a certain extent, but all of our feel good stuff was at like 80% speed rather than 50% speed. So all of our feel good stuff was we'd attach an approach to it, whether even if it was like, hey, I want you to hit this off the left field foul pole. like as a power guy, and I want you to chase this, and I want you to go poolside jack and home run derby this thing. But that was also always off the mini hack in some form of game-ish like speed. Like when we play the worst team in our conference, I want this to be that level of fastball. So we kind of raised the floor of like, we're never going to see this like easy arm that's going to wing it right down the middle and those kinds of setting. And I know not everybody has a pitching machine that they have access to. If you're listening to this, be like, what? I just mean like firm up your BP a little bit, basically. It's like even when you are only throwing fastballs and even when you're only exposing guys to that, just firm up your BP and make it be something that's a little bit more similar to what they see on a day-to-day basis to be able to raise the floor of expectation. So even their feel good stuff starts to become game like and they don't even realize because they're exposed to it so frequently. I think where programs really get into problems is when they try to be Mr. Nice Guy and then try to pull the rug out from under them, right? Like when our guys were swimming in the deep end, and we had a great group of guys that were like, I'm sure when they went back to their apartment, they hated me, but at least when they were with each other each and every day, they were very positive. They were able to understand why we were doing what we were doing. And when guys were struggling, the player led leadership were the ones kind of holding them accountable. But if we can raise that floor, they don't even realize how easy those environments got. I mean, by the time we were in a regional, we were hitting double hack and things like that, like 19 guys through the roster barreling up random settings. And it's like, that's pretty good, right? Like, but like those guys didn't even realize how much they adapted to that through the course of the season and how it was like all the stuff that they were doing on a day-to-day basis, that their feel good stuff became really challenging.
Yeah, like, and I think there's just some really good leadership stuff in there. Like, so much to this conversation. It's like we've talked about being able to communicate. We talked about it. You don't want to beat them down too much. And like, I think it's so important that, you know, they understand you're on the same team, right? Like you're there to help them, but you set the standard as the coach. You set the expectations. And, for so many guys, it's life or death if they don't hit that. And having them understand that, hey, not everybody's going to, meet the bar that we need to, because that's sports. And some days you might. Guys who 90% of the time are up there are going to have days where they're not, and that's okay. That doesn't mean I don't like you. We talk about it all the time, like the value. So many players, especially young players, high school especially, like their identity is their batting average or their ERA, and like that's it. And we made the joke on here the one time, like guys who open up the season and give up 2 runs that first weekend, they think the girl in their accounting class isn't going to talk to them, and it's like that has no bearing on it. And you have to, like, being their position coach is like, that is where it's like you're in it together. You have to work together. Like, here's the facts: you're not good enough right now. Here's why we can accomplish it together. And like, to me, how much, like you said, then you build in all this other stuff and you build in the challenging environments, how much more receptive they are to those environments, and how much easier it is for them to raise their level when they understand, like, this is where I'm at. This is the expectation. This is how I get here. Coach is going to help me get there. And like, yeah, you're the one setting up the environments for them to fail, but like, you want them to fail, because that's what baseball is like being able to just kind of be numb to failure in a lot of ways. You kind of have to be a psychopath a little bit, where like it can't bother you, especially when you get to the college level and you're playing 50 games and, you're getting, 250 at bats. You get 250 at bats in here. You know how many times it's not going to go your way? A lot. And like the best players are the ones who, like, doesn't matter.
Well, I think that was the thing that I probably prided myself on the most, was being able to put yourself in their shoes, right? I think if there's anything hitting coaches specifically do wrong more times than not, if I'm ever going to be somebody that's going to judge at that extent, is the fact of the matter that they act like hitting is easier than it is, right? And we would prepare our guys. We held an expectation. There were approaches built in. There were expectations to execute at the rate we needed them to execute at, right? Like all of those things were high standards. But when push came to shove in game and there was the opportunity for them to execute and they didn't, the first person they would come face to face with was me. And I still remember in those settings where being in those guys' corners is what set them up for success long term, at least in terms of my relationship. I still remember this example. First game of the season, we got punched in the face. First game of the season, reigning conference pitcher of the year on the mound. We go down to Fayetteville, North Carolina, which ironically is not too far from here where I live now. And we just get dog walked, right? First game of the year. It's like we thought we had a pretty good club, all these things like that. Errors, not executing offensively, our pitchers walking too many guys, all of those things that we did not really expect to happen. We did. And I remember there was a player that I had a pretty good relationship with, and runner on third, less than 2 outs, just punches out, like doing everything wrong. Our approach was, hey, swing at the first strike, takes the first strike. Like it's just like everything that you want, like goes down looking, doesn't even put the ball in play, like all that stuff. And I remember like he's walking with his head down, coming back to the dugout. I'm standing in right next to the on deck circle where I always stood, and he looks up to me, and it's like deer in headlights, like frozen. I'm like, all right, well, first off, you're going to get hit by a foul ball if you just stand there. Like, let's get in the dugout. And I still remember him saying to me, he's like, I'm sorry. And I'm like, sorry for what? And he was like, well, I didn't execute. And I'm like, yeah, we're playing
We all
Division
saw
three
it.
baseball. Yeah, there's 40 guys in the dugout. There's 40 guys in the other dugout. There's 50 parents watching. We know. And he was like, and you're not mad? I'm like, no, I mean, you need to be better in terms of X, Y, and Z, but that's what we train for, right? Like that's what and I remember like seeing like it looked like he had a barbell on his back and it just like flew off. And that allowed our guys to execute at a higher rate later in the season, because it was like, in 2 years of coaching, I was an assistant hitting coach, and then I was coaching, obviously, the main guy. I never yelled at a single guy, right? Like the things I would yell at guys for would be stuff that our guys just didn't do. But it was like, attitude, laziness, those kinds of things. But like being able to be that arm around their shoulder when they don't execute, because again, like I'm like, dude, the whole ball yard knows you didn't. Like you're 18, 22 years old. Like you're an adult. Like, I don't need to tell you that you didn't execute. There's a runner on third, less than 2 hours. Yeah, no crap. You didn't get him in. Great. Like, what is me jumping down your throat going to do in that moment? As long as you know you didn't do anything wrong. Okay, well, let's be better next time. What did we do wrong in that setting? Okay, let's have a honest conversations. And the amount of, I mean, I was lucky enough. I was living by myself in a city that I didn't really have any, family in at the time. And so like the amount of Saturday conversations once the spring got nice, where I would just like hang out at the field and talk to our guys about, whether they were struggling or going well, and being able to be that person in their corner. Like that's the most important thing, especially as a hitting coach, right? Like you're not the head coach, right? Wins and losses don't go on your record, even though I was 0-1 that year because skipper got ejected. I take the L on that one. Like that's kind of unfortunate, 0-1 head coaching career. But it's one of those situations where like you can be the good guy, right? Like you should be the good guy. You should be the process guy. You should be the guy that's there for them, supportive. But so many times hitting coaches, they want to be the hammer and they want to come down on those guys. And it's like, they know, like, unless you have a bunch of guys that are just ignorant, arrogant, have no idea, you haven't educated them, all these things that are very uncommon for guys that want to be successful. Like I've never seen a reason to be too hard on your guys offensively. Like again, there are things that you can be hard on them, but typically that would be something we'd hold accountable as a group, right? If we're not executing high enough in a certain situation, we'd hold them accountable as a group. I'd be a little bit more of the bad guy in a group setting, but one-on-one is just being able to be supportive, right? Like everybody knows hitting's hard. Too many times hitting coaches are like, how are we not hitting this guy? And the amount of times that Skipper would come back from the third base coach's dugout and be like, hey, what's going on? I'm like, we're good. We're getting push pop one time through the lineup, 7 punch outs, no hits. Kids like average at best. What's going on? I'm like, hey, we're good. Like morale's up over here. We're good. And he'd be like, are you sure? And I'd be like, I hope so. Right? Like, I hope so. But like at the end of the year, like it got to the point where he wouldn't even say anything to me because it was just like we had the right group of guys that were kind of all pulling on the same side of the rope at that point. But, I think that kind of goes into your ability to be in their corner and be there when they need, the towel and, in between rounds of boxing. And because hitting is so hard that those guys will be beat up 9 times out of 10. And you just got to help them out sometimes.
Yeah, and again, it's just like a lot of these guys wear their stats as their identity. Like they wear them around their
It's like
neck.
tattooed
And
across your forehead, your triple slash line.
100%. And so much of it is a lot of times guys do kind of fall into over the course of a season, especially at the college game. Like the identity of their coach is kind of what they take on. And I always tried to remember that, or at least I believed it. And again, sometimes we should get our bosses on here and ask them if anything we remember about our career is true. Because I don't know, right? Like you don't know actually, or maybe some of our former players at the very least. Because like I don't
Yeah.
know if it is, but my reality was that that's what I tried to do, and I would always try and just be like flatline, not high or low, right? You don't want to get too high or low because then they get high or low. And usually in the
Hmm.
course of a baseball season, if you're riding a roller coaster, um, you're going to have a lot of trouble being successful.
I just can't sit there and not, equate it to, a fight, right? Where it's like you train whether you're an MMA fighter, any of those kind of sports, and it's like you train so hard, and like if you're over emotional, like you can't expect to win in that moment. You can't just go
Right.
crazy and just like over emotional in those moments, especially as a hitter, right? Like I was somebody like I think there is a level of pitcher, like you see the Max Scherzers of the world that can go out there and like
Few and far between.
few and far between, exactly, like more than likely those guys are too emotional in those moments, right?
Yes.
But I think as a hitter, if you are like overly emotional, your tension, your I always called it aura. I did believe that hitters had an aura to them, and I always used to tell guys like you tense, like I can see it. They're like, how do you know? Like I just see it. Like I don't know, like because you the way you're holding yourself, the way you're gripping the bat, you can see it, and like you're gonna start jumping out of your shoes. You're gonna be early on 90. Right, you're gonna be early on 95 if you're trying too hard to do anything, right? Like as a hitter, like I've always imagined that. So it's like if you're that tone setter where you're like this, just like overly anxious, overly hard coach that's expecting guys to be perfect, what do you think the nine guys that are playing every day are going to feel?
Yeah. Well, and it's yeah. I mean, I had a rule of thumb too. Like I always if you adrenaline dump coming off the mound after an inning, your outing's over. Right? Because it's just like you just and same like to go back to your fighting analogy, like if you dump all that that out, that guy's still standing, you're
Mm-hmm.
done because now your tank's empty.
Yeah.
And that's why it's like a lot of times guys who could kind of be flatlined a little bit, those are guys who can go deeper in and those a lot of times the makeup of the guys that do have the Scherzer in them are usually relievers because they can come in
Yeah.
for one inning, and you can come in for one inning and be a maniac sometimes and be good, but then there are days where it goes off the rail on you, and you
Mm-hmm.
know I, we're getting into a different conversation, but sometimes it's dangerous to feed off the environment around you
Yeah.
because then
Well, and
you're letting the externals kind of control you and your performance, and it's so important to be able to stay grounded and be in control of yourself and what you can control, because in the sport of baseball there's like two things you can control and everything else is outside of your control.
there are guys that are, mouth breather mentalities that need that from a competition standpoint. You always hear about the undersized guy that, the Dustin Pedroias of the world that are like somebody's out to get them the whole time. And I think as a coach, what really good leaders do is they don't take that away from a guy, but that also
Right.
doesn't mean they don't expect that from every guy. Right?
Right.
It's ability to be able to understand Friday night starter for you might need to be, 5 innings of a little bit high energy. He's a little bit more animated, and then he adrenaline dumps, and you get him out of there. And then Saturday, I'm like, like he's knitting between innings. He's just like, doop, 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 like sitting there twiddling his thumbs because he's so mellow. Hitting's the same thing. You're going to have your guy that's going to be the competitor, that's going to be, in the box, Juan Soto in staring at dudes and things like that. And it might not be your preference to be emotional, but those guys might need, like, that might be their motivation, right? Like, and being able to empower those guys to be like I know we're getting down a different stretch here, but like we had a hitter who overly emotional after bad results. And I'm somebody who's like very obviously, as I'm sure you can tell, it's like you can't, no, like don't like throw your helmet, like all that stuff like that. And I remember one time he was a veteran guy, so I had enough of a relationship with him to have this conversation and be frank about it. It was like, hey man, like let's talk about it, like off, like come by after practice. I want to talk about this. And he goes, I just need a minute, 2 minutes to let it out. I said, okay, but you're not going to throw your helmet because I don't do that, and I'm not okay with that. But I'll give you 2 minutes of like breathing heavy and pissed and say the pitcher sucks and everything that comes into it, right? Like every emotion that comes out. But I will turn around after 2 minutes and tell you to stop. And he goes, fair deal. So I remember one time, it is just still in my head. It's like he's sitting there, he breathed 2 minutes. I'm like, 2 minutes are up, man. He's like, 1 more minute. I'm like, okay, I'll give you 1 more minute, right? Like, and I just let him be like, all right, now it's done. You good? And he'd always be like, by the time he went out to defense, he'd be like, you're good. And it's like, obviously, that's not what, the mellow guy that, is doesn't play as much needs. It's like, I can't be like, go throw your helmet, show some emotion. No, he doesn't need that, right? Like, we don't need him to be pissed in the moment, but being able to take what that guy needs in that moment and be able to give that to them as a coach, I think is really, really important, right? Like, and you have to be, I mean, there's, this is not a one-on-one sport, right? Like, even though there is, we speak about it in like, you're the pitching coach and there's one pitcher in the moment, or you're the hitting coach and there's one hitter in the moment, or even in the private setting where you're only coaching one guy. That's what makes college and high school coaches so impressive to me, is they're malleable to 40 different dudes.
You have to be.
You have to be, right? You have to be able to stroke different parts of people's ego and motivate people in different ways. And some people need a kick in the rear and some people need an arm around the shoulder. And you have to be able to do both, or you're not going to be very successful. And I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle, is being able to be adaptable, be the chameleon. And again, like you said, I maybe we should have some players on here. Maybe we should have our former bosses on here and see if we were actually that. I know if both of our former bosses tune in, so I guess you guys can text us if you're still listening right now. If that was the case, if we were as good as we envision ourselves 4 years of sitting on the couch and watching baseball games, if we're
So
still
much easier
as
from
good,
here.
so much easier to sit here and say. But I do think it is important to at least understand.
Yeah, yeah. It's a lot easier to criticize these coaches from where we stand, especially when we get to talk to so many of the good ones.
Yeah, no question. It is funny that some of the schools we've been to, the box scores usually tell the full story on
Yeah,
weekends in the springtime, and a lot of them win more games than they don't. And I think, again, this is a whole nother episode. That's the biggest takeaway from the interviews we've had. Dan Hefner understands humans. Does he understand the swing? Yeah. But you want to know why he's the best hitting coach in the country? Because he understands humans. Matt Hobbs understands humans, right? He understands people, and he's able to communicate that message to whoever. We always joke about it that if you bumped into Matt Hobbs in the streets of Fayetteville, Arkansas, and said, hey, man, explain why some fastballs at 90 miles per hour are good and some are bad, he'd explain it to you in such an eloquent
carve out
way.
an afternoon.
Yeah, you'd have an afternoon with him, and you'd be a master on that topic by the end of it, because he'd explain it to you, and you could understand. You could be a cricket fan, and he'd be able to explain it to you. Be like, well, what sports do you like? And he'd compare it, he'd tie it in, he'd explain it to you. You don't think he can do that for the 20 guys that are on staff this spring?
Right.
Right. And that's what makes those guys successful. So that's why I think we're so passionate about having this conversation and making sure that we highlight that part of the coaching side of it, because the mechanics, all of those things, the approaches, all those things are super important, and it's a part of the mental game. But I think really when it comes down to it, it's about being a really good leader. It's about making sure you understand what your guys need in that given moment. And I think it's about obviously giving them the opportunity to execute. So if you're still listening at this point, make sure you smash that subscribe button. Obviously, we do this each and every week. We're not going to be box score watching this spring. We're just going to be talking about some different topics from a player development lens. Obviously, fun guests that we can try to continue to get on, and then ramping back up the unofficial visit come summertime is the plan. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of our content in this 2026 year. But that'll do for this episode of the Baseball Development Hub podcast.